Well, welcome in, LSU fans. It is that time of the year. And no, I'm not talking about where you're going to be heading for Valentine's Day dinner. But my wife and I did that last Saturday with the baby. And so we're all cleared off to be in the building at Alex Box this weekend. College baseball season is underway, and we're here on Go 24/7's podcast to give you the latest of what Jay Johnson had to say today on Wednesday, and just kind of some thoughts overall on where this rotation, the lineup might be headed, and then obviously, Glenn, some preseason expectations for a team that looks a lot different. For a team that is maybe different than teams that Jay has had in the past, different than LSU fans have had in the past. But overall, I wanted to kind of kick it off because you were there in the building. What is the mood of the players? I know Kate Anderson spoke today. He's going to get that Friday night nod. What's the mood? I mean, what is the mood around this team as they head in to really kick things off here in 2025?
Yeah, I think just from an excitement standpoint on the outside, everything is very businesslike inside that building, and just you get very straightforward answers from Kate Anderson and Josh Pearson and Jay Johnson. They're very mellow guys, and
Mm-hmm.
they all fit the profile of what their head coach is. So they're very to the point and very business oriented, and it was great, getting to talk to them a little bit here before the start of this season because these are two returners on a roster that is very, very new as a whole. I mean, these guys, and this is a team that's pretty experienced as a whole, but very
Yeah.
new as well. And so it's interesting to hear what they have to say just in terms of obviously we'll dive into this thing a little bit more, but Anderson being named the Friday night starter, Josh Pearson in the outfield, those are two spots there that we didn't have. I think we kind of had a good feel on towards the last couple of weeks, but for much of this offseason, we didn't really have much of an idea of who LSU could be leaning towards on the mound in those starting roles because they've been getting some really stellar performances from about 7 or 8 guys now for the better part of a month since they returned from that winter break. And so same goes in the outfield. You got so many
Mm-hmm.
7 or 8 guys that could play in those 3 spots, and those are just 2 of the positions there that I think are they're still going to be up for grabs. As we kind of head into the season here, I think there's no pen being used right now. Everything's in pencil, and we'll let the non-conference play kind of hash all this out.
Let's talk a little bit about that rotation. Funny enough, D1 Baseball listed all three guys in their top 150. And not saying that Jay pays attention to a lot of the media stuff that happens outside of that building, but it's funny enough that the three guys, like you mentioned, Cade Anderson getting the nod. I wanted to start with him, Glenn, because all throughout this scrimmage season, he's not just looked comfortable, he's looked dominant at times with the ball of his pitches working. If you haven't seen the interview that I did with him kind of a couple weeks ago before they kicked it off, he talked a lot about developing another pitch, another breaking ball. And just in general, what have you seen from him, and what was kind of the message from him? And I know he's a very humble young man in terms of being named the Friday night starter, and the SEC is not a bad deal to get as a sophomore.
Yeah, poise and demeanor really come to mind when you watch Kate Anderson speak, when you watch him on the mound. This is a guy who I don't think is going to get rattled by anything this year. We'll have to obviously wait and see how it all plays out, but just in terms of what I've seen, in the fall and the spring scrimmages that I've gotten to see him pitch in, and I think between the fall and the spring, I've seen him pitch maybe 5 times, and he's looked the part in every single one of those outings. It's
Mm-hmm.
really impressive how consistent he is from a strike throwing perspective, how he mixes his pitches between the fastball. He's got a really nice slider now that he added in the offseason that I think could be a really good kill pitch for him in terms of strikeouts. I think he's the real deal for a Friday night guy. What do you want out of a Friday night pitcher? A guy that's going to go out there and give you 5, 6, 7 really solid innings. A guy that's going to, really, I think, set the tone for the rest of the weekend for the rest of the pitching staff. And just in talking with Jay Johnson and talking with Cade, he's taken a big time leadership role too with this staff. I mean, he's only a second-year pitcher, but he's honestly one of the more experienced pitchers on this roster now because of the turnover they've had from last year to this year, where 12 of their 14 starter are big time arms in terms of innings pitched last year are no longer on the roster. So
Yeah.
it's Anderson is going to be a huge part of this thing. I think it's very deserving that he got that Friday night job, and I know you've had a chance to see him as well, and obviously had a chance to speak with him some. But just what do you think, I guess, are kind of the qualities that make him a good Friday night guy for LSU going, at least to start the year.
Yeah, I mean, at least to start the year, and maybe something that can help carry him through the year. And as a word that's used was just the demeanor. You have to have a mix on the mound of a guy who, has that you can't touch me type of mentality. I think Cade Anderson has the confidence, but also has, what do we always say? Quarterbacks need to have short term memory, and you have to have that out on the mound because baseball is one of those games where things can start to mount. They can mount against you, or they can mount for you, and so I think that Anderson possesses that now. Look, are we going to see that on Friday against Purdue Fort Wayne? Adversity. I don't know. I think we're going to learn more about him as the season goes along. When they head out to Frisco and they play some higher level competition. They get into SEC play, that first series against Missouri. When you start to kind of see the jump in competition take a step up, that's when you really kind of you get to see what is this kid really made fun of, or made of, not made fun of, but made of in general, because I think that if Cade Anderson goes up there on Friday and throws 6 in the third, or something like that, and strikes out 8, and no runs on 2 hits, everyone's going to be really excited. But I think a lot of us are going to be like, okay, that's step one. That's step one. Going out there and proving you deserve the nod. The preseason, like you mentioned, Glenn, is way different than when we saw him, last year in Chapel Hill. We saw him in the SEC tournament where he really kind of found the mojo. That's what you hope translates, that mentality he had. And I think a lot of his pitching free. I think that's something that I'm interested to kind of see. As a freshman, when he made his debut against Southeastern in Hammond, that turned out to be a great game last year, and I was there. I think that it's easier as a freshman because you don't know what you don't know, kind of thing. You're just you're fresh, you're having fun. Like when we talked to him, he's like, yeah, I was in the SEC tournament. Like last year, I was pitching high school ball. It's a difference. Now being tabbed as the Friday night guy, carrying the pressure and the weight of that, even through the non-conference portion, I think is something just, you get to see what he's made of. And that's why you have this non-conference slate. But I'm excited to watch it because, Glenn, we've been out there and he has made some guys that are going to be in the starting lineup like look a little foolish at times with just his command, not just north to south, but east to west. I mean, he really feels comfortable with landing anything he wants in the strike zone.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think, we can, we can kind of move on to the rest of the weekend here. Because I do think that, it has also been leaning towards Anthony Ianson as the Saturday guy and Chase Shores as the Sunday guy. Like, I think those decisions, I mean, we just talked with Jay Johnson today. He made that call on Anderson 2 weeks ago. He made the call on Ianson to start on Saturday last week. And then earlier this week, he made the decision to start Chase Shores on Sunday. And I think it had been trending that way. I mean, Ianson's a guy that's just going to flood the strike zone. He has a mid-90s fastball, has great control over his breaking balls as well. And somebody that I think is going to really show himself in this non-conference slate. I think the biggest question with him is going to be how it translates to the SEC, because he is a guy who hasn't pitched in this kind of level of competition that he'll be facing on a week in, week out basis in conference play. And then for Chase Shores, I think he's somebody that it made all the sense in the world that LSU wanted to get him into that starting rotation to start the year. I'll be interested to see kind of how he looks coming out, because I've seen him pitch a handful of times going back to the fall, and it's been a bit of a mixed bag, and I don't think that's out of pocket to say, just because he's coming off of a really serious injury, and you got to have those reps under your belt. And this was a guy that pitched only 18 innings as a true freshman back in 2023 for that national championship team. He's still a very young college pitcher in terms of how much experience he has. And so I think it's a good decision to put him out there, in that starting role to get the year going and see how he handles it. You can always pull back a little bit if need be, let him get his feet wet. If there's some struggles early in the season, let him try to, kind of work on some stuff in terms of his command. But I mean, the fastball is legit 96, 97 when it's at its highest. And I think he has a chance to be a really dominant, dynamic pitcher for LSU this year. And, just in talking with Anderson today, he told us that there's legitimately 5 or 6 guys he could see being a Friday night starter on this roster. And I asked him a little bit later on, who are the 5 guys? And he kind of dodged me a little bit and said that, he didn't want to give away all the names there, but you can kind of decipher for yourself, I think, for what this rotation is going to look like. And you have Ianson with Shores there in that starting role, and then you kind of move on to that bullpen, and it's like, man, Connor Ware, Zach Cohen, William Schmidt, Kason Evans, Cooper Williams. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing somebody right now off the top of my head, but you get legitimately 9 or 10 guys into this pitching staff, and you're like, well, dang, these guys could potentially be huge role players or starters at many other colleges across the country. And so it's very what they were very deliberate with how they went about their offseason. And I think Jay Johnson understood that they really needed to improve the depth of the pitching staff, considering what they'd lost last offseason, and they've just done a really nice job of replenishing that unit, and they've all had really good moments this offseason. And I'm just curious, like, behind those three starters, or maybe even including the two other guys on the weekend, just are there any pitchers that have really stood out to you, or guys that have really made a huge impact on kind of what you think their roles could be going into the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it does kind of, and you mentioned this, it does kind of beg the question of, could you play around with it? Like, could you
Yeah.
see these three guys against Purdue Fort Wayne, and then next weekend, do you see not just a totally different three, but maybe a different one slotted in somewhere? Because when you kind of get to the bullpen, Glenn, I mean, you have guys that have, I'll use the word stretched out, like that they can start. So you could piggyback essentially, two or three guys over the course of 7 or 8 innings, and then see a Guidry pitch, just the ninth type of situation if you want to keep him fresh early on. Because look, I mean, you mentioned some of those names right there. Like, I'll go back to a couple. Like, let's just say, and this is obviously just hypothetical. Let's say you get Cade Anderson 6 innings of work, and then a guy like Kason Evans comes in, he can throw 2 or 3. It's not just you don't have. And I'm hesitant to say this because it may happen later in the year, but you don't have like a power reliever that's just going to go max effort for 1 year. I think there's so much depth in the starting pitching. It allows you to be versatile with what you want to do. And it also allows you to keep the bullpen fresh. And I think that's something that we saw and you see across college baseball, towards the dog days of June and July, or, when you kind of get really close into Omaha. That's when your depth's tested, especially on the mound, and where you can go with it. And LSU, like you said, they shored that up on paper. Now, is it going to happen? We'll see. Another guy that I'm interested to watch and is Jaden Newt, a guy that I think his name kind of gets passed over. Jay said he's been pitching well the past couple of weeks. Doesn't pop off the paper, but Glenn, every single year it feels like there's a couple guys that just come in and they're just reliable. You know what I mean? Like they give you 2 or 3 innings or maybe 4 innings over the course of a weekend, and you go back and look and say, man, they helped you win that game. They helped you keep you in that ball game.
Yeah, there's a reason that LSU stretched out 7 or 8 guys, in the kind of the lead up to this season. And, I think that whether it's Zach Cohen, whether it's Gavin Guidry, whether it's Connor Ware, William Schmidt, or Kason Evans, those were the other pitchers outside of the 3 that are going to be in that starting rotation. There are bullpen roles that are still not been defined yet. I think what's going to be so interesting about this weekend is going to be, who does LSU send out in the 8th and 9th inning against some of these teams now, or against Purdue Fort Wayne. I guess if LSU's blowing a team out, or blowing Purdue Fort Wayne out, like I would imagine they do at least a couple times this weekend, do they want to put their big bullets out there for the 8th and 9th inning and treat this like a close game or something? Like I'll be interested to see kind of what that looks like. But in terms of like closing roles and what this thing could look like, I mean, you could go to any one of those 5 guys, and I think they probably would be able to get the job done, because they pitched extremely well. I mean, Connor Ware is a guy that, going back to the fall, I think if you combine the fall and the spring, outside of Cade Anderson, he's probably been LSU's best pitcher. And what we know about Jay Johnson is that they're going to throw their best guy, or one of their best guys, at the end of games. I think that absolutely can be Connor Ware. Gavin Guidry is going to be another one of those guys that I think is going to pitch at the end of a lot of games. William Schmidt, I could see closing some games out, or being a setup guy for a closer. We've always, I think one of the big questions for the media this year has been, who's going to be that Griffin Herring type for this team. And, Schmidt, Kason Evans, Connor Ware, all those guys, Zach Cohen, fit that mold of a guy who can come in and eat up a bunch of innings in a close game when maybe the starter isn't producing the way that they need him to. So having all those guys stretched out will accomplish that, but it'll also be a good safety net in case one of the guys that is starting, these first several weekends of non-conference play maybe has some bumps along the way, or
Mhm.
is not going to be the one that's a long-term starter. Because what we also know is that, at least for the last 2 seasons, the weekend rotation that started the year is not the weekend rotation that's ended the year. And so, what that could look like, all that stuff is going to be very interesting to watch unfold here for this pitching staff. So, I'm endlessly curious to see kind of what happens with a lot of these guys. And we didn't even mention a bunch of the other role players that are going to be pitching some big innings for this team throughout the course of the 2025 season.
I'm excited to watch Maverick Rizzi pitching non-conference play. Like, if that's a
Yeah.
guy who gets like a couple innings, I just want to see what he looks like out there on the mound. And you're exactly right. I mean, you go back to Zach Cohen. Like, if I'd have told you, okay, let's go back to the Super Regional, or let's go back to the Regional, and obviously in Chapel Hill, and LSU faces Zach Cohen, and I told you right then and there, hey, that's going to be your Griffin Herring next year. Like, he may not break the rotation, but that's gonna be your guy that you bring in the fourth inning if the starter struggles, and he bridges you from the fourth to the seventh or the eighth. And I think a lot of LSU fans will say, "Yeah, we'll take that." That he made us look pretty tough, at times. Like, we'll take that. And Zach Cohen, outstanding pitcher they got out of Wofford. Um, Pitching staff's gonna be fun. Gavin Gidger was named on the Stopper of the Year list. I'm excited to kind of see what he looks like in that mode, knowing it's his there as well, and what they look to develop him into. But Glenn, let's take a look at the lineup, where I don't want to spoil it for folks, but if you haven't already, Glenn did do a final LSU baseball lineup prediction. Um, and Glenn, like I said, I don't want to spoil it for everybody, but just kind of maybe talk about pieces in this lineup that you're just excited to see. I will start off, and I will spoil a little bit of it. I think Chris Stanfield's going to be really fun to watch.
Mhm.
This is a guy who has a lot of the same tendencies I think that you like in the outfield. Good glove, really fast, smart, veteran player, not just across the board, but in the SEC, has played at LSU. And Jay Johnson even said during the recruiting process, they looked back at when they went to Auburn 2 years ago and when he played at Auburn, or they played at LSU last year. And Stanfield's a guy that stuck out to him and gave them trouble. You get him at the top of the lineup, and he feels like a table setter, and Glenn, his bats really come around. So that's a guy I'm kind of excited to see. And obviously, Jared Jones and all that kind of stuff. But maybe who are two or three guys you're like kind of excited to see what they look like?
Yeah, I think you can go in so many different directions with this.
All night.
I think for me, how Michael Braswell looks at third base is going to be very
Mm,
interesting. Like, I think we had an inkling, and those who watch this pod and have followed LSU baseball, they probably have already seen it. But Jay Johnson came out today, said Steven Milan's going to start at short to begin the year. Braswell is going to start at third base to start the year. He was very complimentary of Derek Curiel, the true freshman outfielder. I would imagine we see him in the starting lineup from day one, and he'll be a very tough guy to knock out of that 9-man rotation. I would
yeah.
imagine. Like, I could see him being a 1 to 56 game starter, barring health, of course. So, but those are just a little bit of the snippets that Jay released today to the media in terms of the position player side. Catcher is going to be another really interesting one for me. And it sounds like what they're going to do here is they're going to have, the rotation like they've had the last couple of years, whether it's Luis Hernandez or Kate Aaron Beatty or Blaze Priester. I think Eddie Yaman could get some opportunities, but really those
Mm,
first three, I think, are going to be really the guys to focus in on here during non-conference play.
yeah.
And I think for me, the one thing that Jay Johnson did say today is that I think it's going to be pitcher based, like how these guys have caught these various pitchers throughout the course of the offseason is going to be where they lean towards who plays on a certain game, where another guy might come in relief. Like, I think we're going to see multiple catchers catching a game to start the year. Like, I don't think there's any reason to go out there and trot a catcher out there for 9 innings, 3 times a week. I think there's going to be a lot of rotating in and out with those 27 innings, those 81 outs for those catchers. So those are a couple of those spots there that I think are going to be very interesting to kind of watch unfold, because getting back to third base, um, Tanner Reeves is a guy. Like, I
Yeah.
every time I've watched him this spring, I'm like, man, you hope that they can find a spot for him out there somewhere because he's so good. But they're going to go into the season with Braswell. I think he had a great end to last year, and Braswell's been really good this year too. I
Yeah.
think it's just we kind of get caught up sometimes in the new face in town and like what that could potentially look like. Dickinson's going to be over at second base. Right field is the other position that I think is going to be really up for debate, whether it's Jake Brown or Ashton Larson or Josh Pearson, and kind of how they divide those reps up in the outfield with Stanfield and Curiel, and just kind of
Mhm.
what that means for the designated hitter spot. Is going to be very interesting to watch unfold. But there's another piece to this that I have found really intriguing, and it's kind of player aside. It's been kind of the approach that Jay Johnson's had to putting together this lineup this season and how it's been a little bit different. Um, he talked about this today, and he's talked about it. If you listen to a bunch of his press conferences going back to the start of the spring, he's deliberately kind of kept himself from writing out a bunch of rotations and a bunch of different lineup combinations just because of how new this team is and how
Mm.
how many players and how many guys are deserving of playing time on this team to begin the year. And I think that's going to hold true. Like I really think we're going to see a lot of mixing and matching here in these first 2 or 3 weeks of the season, to figure out kind of what the best combinations look like against certain pitchers. I was talking about this with another guy, Hunt Palmer, who does a great job here on 104.5 ESPN in Baton Rouge. And he was, talking through like LSU could legitimately have a lineup where they go completely left-handed, like like lefty heavy. Like, I mean, they could
Yeah.
have 6 or 7 left-handed batters out there, depending on what they want to do on a certain day. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to watch unfold. Kind of a lot of these decisions that are going to have to be made in the field, and I don't think LSU's really close at a lot of them. I mean, I think we have an idea that Milam and Braswell are going to play a lot of innings in the infield. Dickinson as well. Jared Jones isn't going anywhere at first base. But outside of that, I really do feel like there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to get a lot of opportunities in the field, particularly during non-conference play, and we'll see kind of which mixing and matching ends up being the best combination for LSU. But there's a lot of different routes they're going to be able to go towards, and I'm very, very excited to see kind of what these lineups look like in the first 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games of the year.
Well, and you mentioned too, I mean, as the season goes along and guys start to establish, dominance and a routine, if LSU comes across, somebody who, a left-handed pitcher, a right-handed pitcher that really, when you look at splits, they really effective righty on righty or same side. Like you mentioned, they could roll out a lineup where they don't feel like they're losing a lot. And hey, we have 6 or 7, lefties, so we're going to force that right-hander to pitch to the opposite hand. It's just something it's a wealth that they have, and we're going to see. Like time will tell. I mean, that's been the whole story of the offseason, right? Like, you went in the portal, you went portal heavy than you probably have in a long time. You went and added, and it sounds familiar, like football. You went and added a lot of big names and a lot of nice names. Now it's time to And Jay Johnson joked on the radio this morning, once again 104.5, he was on off the bench. He said, we're just kind of ready to play somebody else at this point. Like, you're ready to see somebody else in another uniform, be able to play somebody else. And I think, Glenn, it kind of, when you look at this lineup, and Jay said this today, and I thought this was, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. He said the big thing for him, and talking with his staff, has been, you don't want your hitters just banging up on your pitchers all fall, all spring. Like, that's not a good sign, and you want good competition. He said they had that in the fall. He said the pitching started off really strong for them, in the early portions of this kind of winter spring scrimmage season. The bats have come on as late, and he goes, I mean, not trying to get ahead of himself, like that's exactly what you want. Like, you
Yeah.
really can't ask for a better spot. It feels like where this lineup is, of where they could go pretty deep. I mean, that outfield combination, Derek Curiel. I'm not going to spoil it because I want you to get a Go 24/7 membership and see where Glenn has Curiel slotted in the lineup. It speaks volumes about where you have a true freshman and a guy that is just he's the real deal. And not even mention on
Yeah.
the field, just with a bat, he's just really, really fun to watch.
Just really smooth, really consistent. I mean, LSU fans that have watched it, baseball for the last 10, 15 years, he reminds me so much of a faster, Antoine Duplantis. Like, I think he's going to be able to spray it to all corners of the field. He's not going to maybe hit for power early in his career, but he'll get a hold of some. Like, he'll get a hold of some. That power tool is still coming along, but
Yeah.
he's got all the other ones, and I think he's going to be a really magnificent player. But another angle to this, and kind of building on what I was just talking about, is one of the things that really stood out to me today with what Jay Johnson was talking about in terms of roles and managing roles for these guys in the outfield and for a number of these positions. They're really going to have to lean on kind of the communication angle of this, because a lot of these guys have come in from other places, and they've been the best player at their other
Yeah.
stops, or they've been the top guy in high school where they're playing every day, and they might not get to play every day here in the early going until they kind of establish their role. And I think that was really something that stood out to me. Jay Johnson had 40 meetings yesterday with all of his players
Yeah.
on Tuesday going into this thing, and kind of just laid out to all of them where they are in the pecking order, what their role is going to be this year, at least to start, and then kind of explaining why that's the case. And I think that is why they've been able to recruit and bring in the kind of players they have, is because the communication has been very, very good from everything that I've heard. And, these players understanding where they are, what needs to improve in their game for them to kind of continue to have opportunities as the season goes along, and, not taking any kind of role, for granted or anything like that. Like, I mean, we were talking with Josh Pearson today, and one of the things that he said, whether you're starting in the outfield or whether you're coming in to pinch hit in the 7th or 8th inning, whether you're put out on defense in the 9th inning, like, you got to treat every single opportunity you're given like you're getting the start in center field. Like,
Yeah.
you've got to have that kind of mindset. And I think that's really important for your veteran player who's been here for 4 years and has played in every kind of role that LSU has to offer, especially in the outfield. That speaks volumes, I think, to where the chemistry is with this group. You hear about it too with Cade Anderson and the pitching staff, and him talking about them having all these guys that could pitch on Friday night and be starters, and kind of accepting their roles and growing from their roles. Like, that is going to be a very interesting piece for me to watch the first 5-6 weeks of the year. I'm going to have something on it on our site tomorrow about kind of the approach that Jay Johnson had to this offseason and putting together this roster and putting together kind of the lineups over the last month or so, and kind of his early thoughts on what that could look like in the season. So make sure y'all go check that out. But, like, there's a lot of different ways this can go for LSU in terms of the lineup and on the mound for that matter. And I think that the depth of this team, maybe they don't have the Paul Skeens, they might not have the Dylan Cruzes of the world, the Trey Morgans of the world, those all-world athletes and guys that have been around college baseball for a while and produce at the highest level. But they have a lot of very good players at a lot of positions, and I think they have a complete roster here that's going to be able to compete at the top of the conference, which in theory will also make you a top of the country type of team.
Yeah. It's crazy when you look at some of these early rankings, and
Yeah.
you see how many SEC teams are in there. So a lot of good stuff, obviously, there. And like Glenn said, you can check that out on the site tomorrow and talk about more about Jay Johnson's approach. All right, Glenn, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here. Let's do it. Before we get out of here, I want your thoughts on your preseason expectations. Now, no, don't just limit it to this weekend. So we'll give, as this is the season preview episode, let's give, where do you think this team ends up? What is the potential of this team? I mean, it's really easy to say the last team, standing and holding up the trophy in Omaha and that kind of thing. But where do you feel like this team ends up, right, as of right now, from what you've seen? I know that's a really hard question.
Yeah, it's a prediction though, so I'm gonna go high, man. Like, I think this is gonna be a top 4 team in the SEC when it's all said and done. Anywhere in that 2 to 4 range. They could potentially win the SEC this year. I mean, they have so much
Yeah.
talent on this roster that if all the pieces kind of connect, that they're going to be one of the tougher teams to get in this conference this year. And if you're a top 4 seed in the conference, it likely means you're going to be a top 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, which means you're hosting a regional and a super regional, which is obviously the the goal number one is to be able
Yeah.
to host from your own place, whether it's in a regional or super regional. And it's I can't remember if you were here to experience it a couple of years ago in Baton Rouge, but a
I literally
regional,
moved, Glenn, as they were playing Kentucky. The weekend they were playing
yeah,
Kentucky in the super regional. So I've never
it's
experienced a regional or super regional.
it's something different, man, and it's why I love covering this team. Really, since 2017, I've been able to cover LSU baseball, and every time they've been able to host a regional and super regional, it's been one of the more fun experiences I've had covering sports in the last 9-10 years that I've been doing it. So it's going to be really an entertaining season. I think that they have all the pieces to be one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country. You got to go out and prove it, of course. And we could look very silly here 2 months from now, but we could also look very, or I should not we, I should say I could look very silly for saying that LSU is going to be a top 5 team before they've even played one game. But the roster has the makeup of being an elite roster, an elite team. And I think the way that they've gone about, approaching this thing with the communication, the demeanor of these guys, they are very, very business oriented. And I think you're going to see that really from the first day on Friday when they get started.
All right. I like where you went. You avoided saying the O word, Omaha. You avoided saying that. And I think, look, we could sit here and say, you know what, they're going to go to Omaha, and then once you get to Omaha, it's kind of a crapshoot. It's like, how are you seeded? Who you got to play when you got to play them, and anything goes when you
Who
get
has
out
the
there.
better day? I mean, LSU's
Yeah,
had really good teams that have made it to Omaha that have been bounced out in 2 games. I mean, it really
yeah,
is just getting there is
and see
is
what happens.
is the goal. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the first step.
I think this. I think the floor of this team, and I'll just say this: the floor is hosting a regional.
Yeah.
I think if you're not one of those top 8 seeds, that would be a disappointment for a lot of fans and maybe people, and just the idea of what you have to do to get the postseason. And obviously, matchups kind of determine. But I'm kind of with you there, so we can both say we may look. We'll say we could look silly, in March as we get ready for SEC play. But I do feel like what you said, the potential, the makeup is there. Like you cannot doubt that they went and did what they needed to do. Now, does it pan out when they face another team and there's a visiting team in the dugout that's not wearing purple or gold? We'll see. I mean, that's what you play the games for. But I like what you said there. I'm saying the floor is hosting a regional. The ceiling, it would be easy to say winning the national title. I say just that's go to get to Omaha. Like that I think that's kind of where I feel like this team can go. If you host a super regional and lose, it obviously would suck and it wouldn't be great. No one would like it. But I think you would know, you know what, you know, that's baseball at some point. Something just didn't bounce your way. As long as this team, Glenn, the biggest disappointing factor would be this team kind of mirrors some things that happened last year. And Jay Johnson said he feels like he knows this team
Yeah.
better than he knew last year's team. He's only gone on record and said that. If the team kind of shows some of the colors of what in the last year's squad, where they just sometimes they couldn't get out of their own way, they made uncharacteristic mistakes you don't see in the LSU baseball program. So that would be the disappointing thing. But I'm going floor is hosting a regional. Anything below that, and
It'd be
the
disappointing.
message boards will be fun to be a part of throughout the
It'd be
summer.
disappointing. And look, I do think that the way the schedule is set up, last year they had just such a hard gauntlet
Oh,
coming out of that
yeah,
SEC. The really the toughest stretch for them. They go back to back to back. They go Tennessee, A&M, and Arkansas, but that's not until late April, early May.
yeah.
So they're going to have some time to get their feet wet in conference play to really kind of figure out what what this roster and what this team is going to look like on a
Mm-hmm.
on a relatively known weekend basis. Like, I mean, I'm sure there'll be lineup tweaks here and there, but there's I think they should have a pretty good understanding by the time they get to that point. And look, they got to play Mississippi State, they got to play Missouri, they got to play Texas at Texas. I think is their second
Yeah.
SEC
They
uh,
face a pulmonary South Carolina squad on the road.
to
Yeah.
end the year. That's the end of the conference team right there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, look, they're going to have their challenges and they're going to have some adversity throughout this season. And I think that is going to be expected. It's how they handle it is going to be very interesting. Last year's team, towards the end of the season, handled it very well. They
Yeah.
got beat. They got hit in the mouth early in the conference, and didn't respond the way that I think Jay Johnson was hoping. We'll see if it's a little bit different this year. And when they hit that adversity, whenever it does come, losing a Friday home game or losing a Friday, Saturday game and bouncing back on Sunday, being able to win. I think that's where it really hurt LSU last year, was that they would lose Friday, Saturday, and then when you really needed a win on Sunday, and especially some of those early series, they just weren't able to get it, and they weren't able to get out of their out on their own way, as it were. So yeah, they're all very valid points, and we'll see kind of what this team is able to do from that perspective of being able to overcome whatever adversity is thrown their way throughout the course of the season.
You talked about that schedule. Mark Etheridge on D1 Baseball did a good job talking about that the home weekends during your non-conference, and this is no disrespect, they're not highly regarded teams. I mean, these are teams that are coming off struggles of kind of what you were wanting to do. You probably won't see a true road environment. I mean, I know they're going to go play in Frisco. You're going to go play Dallas Baptist, which is a good test at the Rangers Stadium. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're not going to see a true road environment until you probably go to Texas there in kind of late March, and that's going to be obviously a fun one for a lot of fans to get involved with. But here's the kicker, and he mentioned this, and I wanted to mention this too as I get ready to kind of do my SEC schedule analysis. You're considering your schedule's easy, I guess, compared to last year. Guess who you miss? Florida, okay, Georgia, Kentucky, Ole Miss, and Vanderbilt.
Yeah,
that's how stacked the SEC is.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
that's who you're missing, and you don't have to play those teams.
And you look at this schedule, and it's still a really difficult schedule. I mean,
grueling, yeah. But you just missed 5 tournament teams, that all have legitimate chances to make it to a super regional weekend. So that's the joy of college baseball and the SEC. So
do we want to shift gears here for a second? I don't know if you've been looking at the roster, but LSU just released their spring roster for football coming up next month.
Oh boy.
Juwan Johnson is listed as a quarterback for the spring.
Well, this won't be a part of the thumbnail.
Thoughts on that?
Juwan Johnson at quarterback. Why not? I mean, why not? In all seriousness, you're not poking fun of the situation. Obviously, terrible thing that happened to Colin Hurley, so it makes sense from a depth perspective to have a third quarterback.
For sure.
But why not? I mean, look, this is a kid who, and I want to be as nice as possible when I say this, because I know you've had conversations with Juwan in the recruiting process. I have as well. He's a playmaker, and I think he's still searching for where he fits on this roster. At times it was running back last season. At times they thought he might be a DB. And why not? Just run through the spring, see what he looks like.
I say that tongue in cheek, sorely from the fact that they could scheme up some very interesting packages with him. If that's something they really want to lean into.
LSU with Juwan Johnson. That's what Glen wants to see, the triple option and some reverse action with Juwan Johnson. That's what he wants to see.
If they want some change of pace back there, if they want to go, with like you mentioned, a triple option or just a mobile quarterback. I mean, Michael Van Buren's a mobile quarterback too, and he's certainly
Juwan Johnson's an athlete though.
But Juwan, I just saw that Zach Nagy from LSU Country just posted that a few minutes ago, and I had to go double check because I was like, no way that's true. And it's very true. Juwan Johnson will be playing quarterback for LSU this spring, and that'll be very interesting to watch next month for sure.
Next month. Good grief. Where does the time go, Glenn? The little we need it. LSU basketball just not pulling their weight this year. No, I don't want to make Glenn talk about it because I know they're about to tip off, right?
Yeah, at 8:00. They got a game at 8. So come. I guess this will be posted by the time that game is long gone. So I'll be talking to myself on that board, on that message thread for a while. So,
well, hey. Great news. A lot of stuff to talk about spring football on the way. Recruiting, junior weekend is going to be great stuff, and a big reason for you to hang out on the site, not just for LSU baseball content, but we're going to be doing some great content all spring long, getting into the summer months, and hopefully a long and fruitful season for the LSU Tigers on the diamond. And hey, I know I don't know how many softball fans, but for her first ever game to go out and throw a perfect game, Hefner, wow. Got the chance to talk to her last week, and who knows? LSU softball could be something pretty fun to watch this year. They've got some nice players out there in the circle. So, LSU baseball podcast. Hopefully we see you out there this weekend. I don't want to talk about the weather, but I will say this, Glenn. I don't know if Jay talked about this at the press conference this morning on the radio. He did mention, and jokingly, breaking news, if it were to rain so bad on Saturday, they might play a doubleheader on Friday. And so Jacob Hester and T Bob Abear, they do the show, and they said, would you play a doubleheader? He goes, no, but like seriously, like that would be a better option than playing on Sunday, because those guys got to get back to where they're going and kind of thing. And so why not a little 2-for-1? And he even joked about this. He said, if you're going to play a doubleheader, the first game of the season's great because nobody's tired. So, it is what it is. So hope to see you out there this weekend. Come say hello. We'll be hanging in and around the stadium. Hopefully good vibes. And man, can't wait for college baseball season to kick things off this weekend. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Head over to Go247, get that subscription, and like and follow on all social media platforms. And we'll talk more about Juwan Johnson playing quarterback here in the next couple of weeks. That's what a nugget to throw there at the end of the podcast.
Yeah. I had to get it in. I was blown away by it. I had to get it in.
We'll catch you next time here on the Go247 podcast.